Hello, I'm Adamowicz, the current world record holder of Breadsticks, and this is the Breadsticks speedrunning guide. So, first off, if you've tried to play around with the game, you might have realized that the controls aren't that good. So, you can use arrow keys for right and left, but WASD is better. And then you can jump with space, as it says here, but you can also jump with W. And these are important to know because you'll need both. Beyond that, you have the bread buttons, which is right for going right and left click for left. And finally, you can pause with the escape button. One more button, which isn't shown here, is R, which is reload, but you might realize that R is a pretty terrible reload button because if you're holding D the whole run, it's pretty tough to reload while doing other things. So, the first thing before I even get into speedrunning is actually change the keybinds. You can't do that in-game, so you want to use some other tool. I use auto hotkey, and I can just show here how I do it. So here's just the file, and this you can ignore. And I've just changed two buttons here. So this is what I've changed. The R button, so reload, I've changed to this, which is just an extra mouse button. And I've changed escape for which is pause, to shift, so it's easier to hit. Once you have that, you'll just have to run it. You can see some auto hotkey tutorials other places and follow them to figure that out. But with that, it's much easier to pause and to reload. Now that you know that, it's good to learn the controls, not just the intuitive ones, but also the more buggy ones, because there's a few bugs in this game. The first being that when you've paused, you can actually do inputs, and it will remember these inputs. For example, different jumps, where when you unpause, it will then execute them. So if you pause, press space, unpause, you'll do a jump. You can pause and press space and hold it, and you'll do a long jump, just like in-game. But if you pause, press space and W, the both jump buttons, and unpause, you'll get a boost. And most importantly, if you then press one of the jump buttons and the other, and you just have to hold down one, when you unpause, you'll jump extremely high. And so W, hold space, and shift. You can also hold down W. It's up to you. Now this is really important for speedrunning because it's the easiest way to gain a bunch of height, and you want to be able to do it pretty quickly, because it makes it a lot easier to reset for and not use a lot of time struggling with the controls. So it's a good thing to maybe practice just to be able to do this very quickly. Now, there's another way to do a super jump, and it requires without using pause. You have to hit W and space on the exact same frame. As you can see, I can't even do it every single time, but it is pretty difficult and not consistent. So that's why in speedruns you don't see this used. You see the pause abuse used because it's just so much more reliable. There is one more bug that is used that's very important, and that involves bread. So if you have a breadstick, you know that you can jump and use them and stuff, but they can be jumped on. So say if I, of course, place a bread, right, I can jump on it, but if you see, I gain height while throwing the bread. And this is useful because if you throw a bread and use that height, that momentum, and do a jump, you'll actually gain a much more height and do more of a super jump. So like this. Like this. Now, why didn't it work when I tried here? That's because it only works, for some weird reason, if the bread is touching the wall while you jump from it. You see there? So here I'm too far from the wall, so the bread isn't under me when I try to jump extra, whereas here, it is. And it only works if you throw it at a wall, like here, no extra jump. The way to execute this is that, or the easiest way, instead of having to say do space, let go, and then hold space again. Since there are 2 jump buttons, you just hold one of the jump and then hold the other down when you use the bread. That way you don't ever have to let go of a jump and get maximum height. So, one key aspect of speedrunning Breadsticks is also the while paused, the in-game timer is actually paused as well. So that means if you're pausing more or less in your speedrun, it doesn't affect the time it takes, because at the end you'll see the in-game time and it doesn't count while being paused. There are a few more things that are important to note about the controls. You can only reload if you have contact to the ground. So up here, I can't reload. And also, if I'm in the air and hold reload down, I won't reload when I touch the ground either. I can only do it while I'm standing on the ground. Now, you can start reloading while standing and then jump. That works. And you can even do it like for 1 frame. And this is very useful in some scenarios, but it can be very hard to pull off where you accidentally jump first and then you don't actually reload. Now for the run itself, it's actually fairly simple. You need to memorize the whole game for the most part, so you never have to pause to think what to do next, so you can just keep moving. There's a very few points in the run where you aren't moving to the right. That's how you can maximize speed, is to use the least amount of time not moving to the right. So in spaces like these, don't wall jump. You actually don't wall jump a single time in any percent, at least the routes we use now, because it's too slow. You rather want to use some sort of way to get up high. There are a few segments which you do lose time because you can't move to the right, and I'll show now all of these in detail. The first one is right here. After the first little gap up here, the second one, a lot of people will maybe tend to just do, as I did here, do a pause abuse jump and slide up the wall. But you can do it slightly faster if you use a bread as well, like this. Now for this part, you want to use your bread as soon as possible, pretty much, to gain the most momentum as quickly as possible. Right after this part, which is a little tricky to pull off, we get I would have to say, the most crucial part of the run, the most difficult to pull off cleanly, and it can have the biggest time save overall, at least from what I can think of. There's a save point right here, so you don't have to reload after doing this jump. What you want to do here is you want to utilize this wall to make a bread jump, like so. But as you can see, you don't want to gain too much height. So if I hold down 1 jump and then just tap a second jump, kind of how I taught before, you'll go too high. So you don't want to hold down. You don't want to hold down your jump button the whole time. You want to let go before you use your bread. That way you won't go too high. So more like this. Now if I do that strategy and I only tap for the bread jump, I don't get enough height. So you have to hold down for the slightest amount of time to just get enough height, and it's very hard to pull off. So kind of like that. That was an okay amount, because it's also, if you go too much, if you get too much height, you will, as you see, you miss the wall, and you'll have to either pause in the air or go backwards to actually reach it. Now, it's still not over yet. There's still more to this, because if you pull off the perfect like that, you might have seen I was standing on that platform for about 1 frame, and in that 1 frame, just like pretty much like that, you want to reload and jump. So you remember, you can't reload while in the air. You can't reload. You have to do it once you hit the ground. So it's about reloading and jumping pretty much the frame or few frames you have on that little platform. It looks something like this. There we go. So as you can see, when I finally when I did my jump and reload here, I used that bread against this wall to get up to the final part of the first section. And here you also want to use the bread as soon as possible to get the jump, so you're stuck less on this wall, but not too soon you don't get the jump. Jump, bread jump, jump, reload, bread jump. those 4 steps, and it is the hardest part. At least it's in the more in the towards the beginning of the level, so resetting isn't too bad. Once you've done this part, if you're don't have enough time, you might forget to reload, and that's okay. What you can do here is just do a pause abuse jump to right around here, so you hit your head there and you don't lose any speed to the right. But if you want to be completely optimal, you want to begin falling down the hole when you're moving to the right. So instead of just moving along this platform and falling, if you're actually falling while going to the right, it's faster. And that requires a very precise full jump here and then a bread bounce. So just throwing the bread behind you so that you just barely don't hit either side of the platform. Now for section 2, the most boring part of the speedrun. There is nothing here that will slow you down. At the end of this open second section, there's one part that is quite difficult to pull off, and that is scaling this wall. Now what you want to do is to do a pause jump up here, and again, just like entering the second section before, you want to be able to not just land on it and go to the right, but actually fall into it just right. And this is also extremely difficult to pull off. It requires very perfect positioning. You can use this stump here to help you position yourself. I think you get the point. Similar to before, you want to not hit the edges. Okay, the last section. This requires some very tight jumps, but once you've practiced them enough, they're not the worst to pull off. So here we have no bread, so it's just more pause jumping. This one can be quite tough. There is actually a time save. You see I'm not moving to the right because for a little bit. Oops. I'm not moving to the right for a little bit because I am sliding against this wall. So if you minimize that, you have to do that pause jump as early as possible, but if you're too early, this happens. And it's a run killer, so it's tough. If you're nervous during your run, just do it safe, and later on this lip, it only saves minute amount. Because this isn't the hardest part. It's what comes next. And this is these 2 jump downs. The intended way is to use this wall jump, but that's a time loss. You want to always be moving to the right. And the only way to get there without pausing is with a very precisely timed jump, just like that. Now what I use is I see when the front of Foxboy is by this nub under the grapes, like when he's standing right around there, you do a full jump and you should land on the platform. And then same when Foxboy is positioned just around this plant thing with like his foot touching it, of course with full speed, you want to do a full jump. So if you do it once, it looks something like this. Yep. Now I would practice that little section a few times. Just kill yourself here until you get the hang of it. Maybe get some move back a little bit so you're able to time it properly, like in runs. But once you can do it semi-consistently, you should be good. Now the last bit of the run isn't that hard. There's a few segments left that are time saves, but most of it is just very obvious gameplay. Just remember when to reload, because that's very important. You'll need to know this. Like here, you want to use, for example, a bread over that hole. Now, we have these walls we have to scale, and we want to, of course, use some bread jumps because that's the most height you can possibly get the fastest. And what you want to do is not just go all the way up to the wall and do this, because again, you want to be moving to the right as often as possible. So the earlier you can do this, the better. That way you slide less along this wall here. If you do it too early though, that can happen. And right up ahead we have the similar thing. Now with 2 walls we need to scale. What I've found the best strategy is to do the same thing here, but not just one bread. You see, you can do it with one bread like this, but you're losing a lot of upward momentum before we reach the ledge, but we actually have 3 bread now, so we can use 2 to get over this segment very quickly. Now, it is a little finicky. You can't use 2 immediately in breadsticks. For some reason, you can't just spam bread while in the air. You see, I can do it down here, somewhat. It's a little buggy, but in the air you can never just spam it. It would be ideal to just be able to do this quickly twice, but you have to wait a certain amount. Also, you want to do this jump early, not that early. You want to do this jumps quite early so you can do your bread jumps as quickly as possible. Not too early, because that happens, but something like this. Go to you again. Once you get up this part, you want to immediately jump, pause jump, and use a bread there. It can be a little scary because you think you'll hit these spikes, but if you do it right, you shouldn't. A good tactic to not hit the spikes at the very end of this part is when you get up here, just keep holding jump. After this bread, keep holding jump so you bonk your head on the ceiling, because you actually fall down to the ground faster and be ready. Instead of just doing a small jump, you actually soar further and hit these spikes. So this can be also tricky. I would practice this section, especially with the timings. And you do hit this lip a little bit, and there's some optimization there, but it's tough. We've reached the end of pretty much the time saves, except for one. And just like falling down other pits, we don't want to just walk along here and begin falling once we're there. We want to ideally be falling earlier so we can quickly fall through this gap while moving to the right, saving a minute amount of time. So it can be quite hard to time this little trick here, but if you use this bump sorta around here to do a full jump and then do a bread at the top of your jump, you will actually fall down the hole very smoothly, something like this, like that. There's actually one last time save involving moving to the right at the bottom of the pit. No one's used it yet, but you can do something like you can move to the right earlier to not have to wait for acceleration, but that is such a small time save at the end of the run, it's not really worth it yet. And that should be all the strats to speedrun breadsticks. Some of them are harder than others, some save more time than others, but you generally want to practice the parts you find the hardest. And so I hope this breadstick speedrunning guide was helpful, and if you have any further questions, you can just ask them down in the comments and I'll respond. Thanks for watching.